Can you hear me through the speakers? I can kind of hear my own voice from behind me, so I'm assuming so. Great. Okay, what a lovely introduction. Thank you, Eleanor. Okay, so as Eleanor said, I'm going to speak to you a little bit today about one of the projects that really has taken over my life over the last probably 3 to 4 years, because the pandemic interrupted a lot of the timeline for the outputs of the project itself. I'll be introducing what I'm doing and what I have been doing, and I'll outline the background to the project. I'll introduce it through 5 case studies that are relevant, hopefully, to members of the BNS, because what you're going to see today is a bit of a snapshot of a much broader kind of thematic and chronological and geographical span of material. So to the sort of the beginnings of this project, it started actually with a small display, a special display that we used to be able to do in the Fitzwilliam. It's called Currencies of Conflict. This was the poster, Siege and Emergency Money from Antiquity to World War II. And this we tend to use in the department to showcase some of the early modern material and the modern material, which don't feature in any of the permanent galleries of the museum. And despite its small scale, it was really just something that was in 2 cases. It got a little bit of buzz, to an extent that somebody from The Guardian phoned up to do a little online interview about it. And what I said, I don't know if it was not good enough, but the excuse was that there was another political crisis that dominated much of the paper that week. So, you know, the cultural stuff kind of got pushed out of the window. But what this did, you know, it suggested to me that there was some appetite for this kind of project, and also highlighted some of the gaps in our own collection, because we weren't able to do all the sorts of things we really wanted with this. So there is this thing called the New Collecting Awards that the Art Fund invite applications for every year. So I applied to the 4th round, and there was some numismatic pedigree anyway with the Art Fund, you know, supporting these kinds of projects. As Tom Hockenhull at the British Museum had his Currencies of Communism project. Then there was my one, and there've been 2 subsequent ones since, one at York Museums and one at Norwich Castle as well. So, you know, they are supportive of our stuff when we go to them. So there were 3 kind of areas that you know, sort of thematic and collecting elements that I put in my application. One was to ask the question, how did wartime money differ from that of peacetime in its materiality, its iconography, and how did the monetary systems of occupier and occupied interrelate? The second point was to ask, how did the concept of what money could be change in emergency situations and during rebellion? And the final part was to look at currency objects specifically that were defaced or mutilated or subverted in some way. So obviously, yes, I'm speaking to you today, you understand that this project was successful, and I got a chunk of money to start the collecting project. And the outcomes that were in that application were, well, the first and most important is that we have a new type of collection within the Fitzwilliam Museum. I managed to acquire 650 objects. Most of those come from one source. I'll come to that in a little bit later in the talk. But, you know, the most were purchased. Some actually were donated when people heard about the project and had things in their collections that they thought might fit the project. Then they were offered to us, and we gratefully accepted them as well. There was a research seminar that occurred, which brought together the contributors to the catalogue. So I've got about 12 contributors to the exhibition catalogue, you know, and they're specialists in different aspects. And not typically numismatists, there are some. I've got archaeologists, anthropologists, art historians, you know, bringing their kind of expertise to some quite difficult material. And then the exhibition. So the exhibition will occur in, well, the end of this year in October, and be up for 3 months. And we're talking at the moment to the Art Gallery of Ontario about them taking a reduced version of the exhibition to Toronto. So there's the new collection, there's the exhibition and its accompanying catalogue. And then what the Art Fund's really good at is supporting curators in making new connections. It's you know, it's the personal and professional development is a big part of why they award these awards. So, you know, I was able to, with the Art Fund grant, make new connections, visit collections that, you know, military collections in particular that have numismatic holdings. And also I made a visit to Belfast, to the Ulster Museum and the Linen Hall Library, to look at their defaced and countermarked coins. The Royal Anglian Regiment stuff that links into the material that is in Belfast. The British Museum obviously have a big collection. I know some of it from when I was there. But these are some of the public collections, at least, that we were able to approach and to get involved with in terms of bringing loans into the to the exhibition. There were also a number of private collections, some of which, are on our doorstep in Cambridge. And when you start talking about projects, that these things come to light. So the thing in the middle there, that's a kind of form of trench art. It's a shell and bullets and coins that have been converted into a ashtray and matchbox holder. That's from an archaeologist actually based in Cambridge. He's got a big collection of World War II stuff that is particularly relevant. Well, it's all really from Jersey and the Channel Islands. There's that group of, well, it's one big print of Banksy die-faced tenors. There's the Khalifa's Treasure House coin in dish from Harry Mernick. And then this is one of Tim Minnitt's collection. He's got an amazing collection of politically countermarked coins. So those are the private collections that are part of the project. This is also another one. Now, the Archive of Modern Conflict might not be familiar to many people. It is a private collection based in London and in Canada. And despite its name, the Archive of Modern Conflict, it has a quite broad remit now as to what it collects. Now, the initial stuff that forms the core of their collection is really sort of a photographic archive, World War I, World War II in particular. Lots of that is online and available, but their remit goes beyond that. So, we've got the Civil Rights Association. So that's the Gilles Perez photos from Bloody Sunday. They have copies of those there. They have the big, that doesn't do justice to the size of it, that banner on the bottom left. That's about a couple of meters wide at least, relating to the Spanish Civil War. But there are monetary things in there too, and it was good to see those and dig those out. One you can see there is a Siege of Khartoum note framed. And this thing here, and it's a dodgy camera shot, but that is a crocodile made from deflationary Venezuelan banknotes. And there's this whole set of animals. There's an owl and a crocodile, a snake, and there's one other, a chicken. And you'll be able to see those all together. But there's an interesting backstory to that of why this man who created this artwork out of money did so, and where he did it and why. So what I'm going to do, as I mentioned at the beginning, is kind of couch this talk in the framework of 5 case studies that I think are relevant to BNS members and highlight some of the really good stuff in the exhibition. So this is the first of those: radicals, reformers, regicides. Who doesn't like alliteration in museum displays? Well, don't answer that, but I quite like it, so it works for this. Okay, so this is like the origins of these defaced political objects. So the first, on the left-hand side there, you can see a defaced coin. This is the earliest in our collection, and it's a William III copper halfpenny, and it's part of the Gavin Scott collection of 550 politically defaced coins. This was one of the first and actually one of the most important acquisitions that the project was able to make, because in the original pitch I put in, I'd like to be able to collect some politically defaced coins that represent a lot of the issues over the past 250 years. But what this collection did was basically took 40 years of assiduous collecting and put it into one collection that Simmons were able to let me know about and facilitate the purchase of. And so we have this amazing collection. I couldn't have hoped to have done in the 2 years that I was collecting. So it's an amazing resource, and it's going to be a theme that runs through a lot of the exhibition. So this piece refers to the Bonnie Prince Charlie and the Jacobite Rebellion. So we're starting really in the mid-18th century, and I wanted to give a little bit of backstory to say why this is kind of exceptional, because I'm not aware of too many examples before this particular one. And this medieval coin that you see here, Edward III wrote, you can see on the obverse the Dominus Hiberniae has been punched out of the coin. I mean, this is something that I'm grateful to Alan Dunlop. He let me know about this in the first place. But it's in terms of medieval stuff, I've not seen anything similar or comparable. I'd like to hear, particularly if any of you have seen this sort of thing. But you know, I think what it does is exceptional in the medieval period, and that's what makes, you know, the beginnings of it in the mid 18th century a kind of realistic proposition. I'd also suggest that there's other, once you sort of get into that period of realistic portraiture under the Tudors and Stuarts, that there is, I think, work to be done to look at the kind of scratching on the obverses of some of those busts, the eyes and the necks in particular. I don't think anyone's done too much with that, but I think there is something there that might be interesting. Okay, so Thomas Spence, I mean, he'll be well known to many of you for a number of reasons. I mean, he's a major figure in the exhibition, partly because he's a known and named defacer. You know, a lot of the other material is done anonymously. I mean, that's in many cases intentional, but Spence did it and put his name to it. So there are two groups of material that are relevant here with Spence. He began publishing his penny periodical, Pig's Meat, which there is a copy in the Cambridge University Library. That's one of the benefits of working where I work, is that there's this amazing collection of printed books and materials that can be relevant in our exhibitions. So we're going to hopefully get that into the exhibition in the Fitz. And he Spence set up shop in London to sell his tokens. These are some just the examples that I put together for this piece and will be in the exhibition. So they refer to various issues. One is his disdain for Thomas Paine. The name of Jacobin clubs refers to him. The end of Paine on this, you know, unsubtle one on the bottom right here. William Pitt's head is on the top of the maypole as these four characters dance around. And then before the revolution, you've got this emaciated character sitting in a prison cell, sucking on a bone. And the other side is quite a different proposition. And that's what Spence was good at. He used the two sides of objects to contrast a before and after almost in his kind of worldview, or at least his ambition. Another element of Spence's work was the countermarking of current circulating currency. Robert Thompson published an article in the B&J in '69, which outlined the punches that he'd recognized on examples. The ones with asterisks are the ones that he saw, but that he'd heard of, but hadn't personally sort of authenticated himself. And the bottom coin here is a good example of, you know, no landlord you fools, Spencer's plan forever. What's interesting from Gavin's collection is the piece above it. And it's the only example I'm aware of that has Spencer's plan on one side, but it's got this idyllic small farm idea, you know, this land held by individuals from the parish rather than from landlords. It's either a river or a lake. There's swans and a lovely tree and these buildings behind. So it's, you know, I think this is really interesting. I'd be interested to know actually if it's based on any contemporary painting. And actually that's on my list of things to do, to ask some of my colleagues in the museum about. So we're going to get to war eventually and repeatedly through this talk, but this is really about the kind of the social consequences of the monetary changes that occur or were forced by the Napoleonic Wars. So the Bank Restriction Act came in and suspended the kind of convertibility of gold, of paper for gold coin from the bank. Paper notes flooded the economy in a way they hadn't before in low denominations, and therefore were being used by a broader sweep of the population. And therefore, those not necessarily used to it may have been more susceptible to accepting and passing forgeries. So this is the one example we have in the Fitzwilliam of a recognised forged note that's been stamped as such. And George Cruikshank was he comes from this sort of golden generation of political satirists. And money and monetary policy were often subject matter for those people, but he's the only one who actually sort of veered into the making use of the materiality of the money itself as the focus, which he did with his bank restriction note, a satirical note in 1819. And it's the first political type, but it really did draw on ideas that were current at the time. And he wasn't the only one that sort of used a banknote. He was the only one that, you know, incorporated imagery on it. A lot of the other ones around this time, it's only the few years either side of 1819 actually. They were almost entirely textual. This Cruikshank uses, you know, he's got the vignette of Britannia eating the babies. He's got the 13 characters hanging there. So this is sort of couched in the exhibition as the sort of one of the social consequences of the Napoleonic Wars. In a more tangential way, this coin fits that mold as well. And it's, as far as I know, again, do tell me if you've seen another one. This is from Gavin Scott's collection. It's the only coin I've seen that's been treated in this way that is a reference to the Peterloo Massacre. So, other interventions on coins. This is, again, another Gavin coin, a cartwheel penny that's been actually inscribed quite carefully and neatly. But I know it's very hard to see in the slide. So at the top, you can see what it says: steam puff and imposition, the order of the day, honesty deported from England by steam. So this is one of the collaborators in the project is Bridget Milmore, who works on this sort of material. And she's one of the contributors who's already given me her contribution. So, you know, I am relying on and benefiting from that fact in today's talk. So this coin itself is a statement against the impact of steam power on the livelihoods of the skilled workers, particularly those who worked in the textile industry, and their replacement by cheap labour that is possible by made possible by new machinery. And it fits in with some of the broader attacks on mills and factories by the Luddite movement. So this is like a coin, a numismatic contribution to that debate, because, you know, there are a lot of other sorts of material culture that reference this, but these certainly the stuff that Gavin collected really helps to support that. And last in this part, this case study of the suffragette related pennies. Now, this stuff's been done quite a lot. Neil McGregor spoke about it in History of the World in 100 Objects. Tom Hockenhull has done made an analysis of the extant examples of the votes for women penny in the BNJ. This one, I think, is additional to the ones that were published there, but fits in with, you know, his kind of typology in that the coins of Victoria, they don't stamp the Queen's face with votes for women. That's reserved for the male monarchs, and votes for women goes onto the back, on the reverse with Britannia. The two other things we show here, this is the first example of a photograph from the Archive of Modern Conflict. And it's about, it's Mrs. Drummond and the Pankhursts being arrested. But the reason this survives isn't because of them as the subject matter. It's actually the arresting officer. And this was part of a presentation that was given to him on his retirement. I think it's interesting in several ways. The other thing here, this was discovered in our collection during the as the project was moving on. And it's one of the hunger strike medals. They are fairly well known, and it's awarded to Constance Lytton. It has, sort of subverting the idea of the military awards and medals, and the clasp you see there on the reverse of those, it is inscribed "Fed by Force." For this example, on the 14th of January 1910. So they're sort of these kind of badges of honour in some sense, and some have more or less of these. What's a little bit worrying, but also interesting about this one is that it's the second known example that was awarded to Constance Lytton, because there is one in the Museum of London as well. So I don't know why that might be. And again, I'm not exactly like fishing for you to do the work for me, but they're both legit. But they are. Okay, so yeah, there's some work to be done, and even discoveries within our own collection while I've been building the new stuff. So I'm going to move away now from the coins that make political statements and or demands for representation, for example, to some of the tokens that reflect experiences of warfare. So I've entitled this "Heirlooms and Battlefield Scavenging." I mean, this is one of my favourite finds that came from a military collection that I started looking through. It's in the National Army Museum, and it's a paperweight that has this collection of material attached to the top. And there's all sorts of stuff going on, and it's fascinating as well. So this comes from India. If we just look at this, you can see the inscription there. It's Wandiwash, which is Vandavasi and Perambakam, both in the state of Tamil Nadu. And there are dates on it. So we've got 1760, 1780. We also, from the mark on the silversmith mark on the back, can date this to the making of it to 1851 to 60. But there's still loads going on. So if we work back through time, it was made in the 1850s in Chennai. It includes objects that were collected in two battlefields in 1760 and 1780, and one of which is a coin struck in 1689 for James II. So what's really going on here? If we think about Vandavasi, that battle was during the Third Carnatic War between the East India Companies of Britain and France, and that gives us a link to the James II coin, because there were, following James's defeat in Ireland, that many Irish soldiers went to France, where they were formed into Irish regiments in French service, and they were known as the Wild Geese. So, you know, even given that timescale here, we're thinking about 1689 to 1760. Was this object, was this coin an heirloom of one of these wild geese that they passed down to someone else who was then also in the military, and then lost the coin? If you know, we can't say much more beyond that on this battlefield. And the musket balls, they come from the Perambakam, which was probably the most severe defeat of the British East India Company against the Kingdom of Mysore. So this is, you know, gives us it's actually one of the earliest objects in the entire exhibition. But for me, it's a fascinating. There's still so much I think we can do in exploring this and other objects like them, because it's not just coins. You know, you find some of these paperweights will have bits of artillery that, you know, wounded general so and so, but they were mounted on paperweights and kept as heirlooms. Another element here is this idea of these military martyrs. It's, you know, and Kitchener, sorry, not Kitchener, don't want to get to the next bit too quickly, but these General Gordon notes, you know, the one here has been framed. This is from the Archive of Modern Conflict, but there's definitely a sense that, you know, this sort of in the late imperial period, these senior military figures that either died in some kind of conflict or, as we'll see in the next slide, survived beyond them, were lauded in a quite particular way. And the idea that, you know, things associated with the places that they were, even they're sort of collecting weird kind of sort of pseudo pilgrimages to the sites that occurred when it was safe to afterwards. That was a thing. And sort of as a numismatic sort of postscript to this little episode, we have when Kitchener went back to Sudan after the Battle of Omdurman and the raid on the Khalifa's treasure house, loads of coins were taken, and then they ended up being incorporated into dishes, and this is one of the ones that we are hoping to borrow for the exhibition. So I mentioned the military guys. This is the Siege of Mafeking is quite an important part of this exhibition. One of the holes in our collection was the Boer War. It didn't really exist. We didn't have any of the emergency money from Mafeking or from the South African side either. We were able to rectify that issue. But once we had the set, I was interested to look a little bit more at the sort of material around Baden-Powell's drawing of the wolf gun as this sort of central image that we see here. So this was a cannon that was made in the railway by the railwaymen in Mafeking, and it became at least central to this note. The other ones are less detailed in this sense, but the Mafeking, sorry, his Baden-Powell's drawings exist still. They're in these ones. There's an album of them in the Scouts Heritage collection, which I went to see when, you know, we were allowed to do all those sorts of things before the pandemic. So we're going to bring that together back with the thing that's the object that it inspired. So trench art, there's Nick Saunders' definition in one of his more recent publications. Now he's the man who kind of coined this subgenre of archaeology. And I invited him to be a part of the project to look at coins within those contexts, because it hasn't been done before. And, you know, in conversations with him, he himself says there is a whole world of stuff we could do after this project, just looking at coins under the sort of the definition of trench art. So some of you will have seen this stuff before. Some of you will know it very well in this room because your name's at the bottom corner there. But this is a penny-sized object. It was made for the scum of the scum, who were the irreconcilables of the Ragama camp in Sri Lanka, those that refused to sign their allegiance to Edward VII towards the end of the Boer War. So it's a little bit about, you know, a numismatic tour into the identity of the imprisoned, and that is another facet of trench art. You know, what do the people in these environments produce? What does it say about them? And the environment of, you know, selling and passing on these things to others outside of the camp itself. This is lovely. I haven't got much to say about this other than I think it's a quite sweet caricature. Who did it? We don't know. I think the whole respects the engraving quite nicely. This is something that I've just seen in this one example, again from Gavin Scott's collection. This is a bit more straightforward. It's a commemoration of somebody who served probably in the Boer War. That has those initials of T and E, and was produced after, because at least we have the dates all the way around to the end of the conflict. So this is fairly, again, straightforward. It's, you know, a commemoration of the armistice, which is in the collection, again, pierced for suspension, so something that should be worn. But what I'm intrigued about is why the different punches that we used for the 11 and the 1918. So are these things separate interventions onto one object? This is a sort of subversion again of the idea of the military medal. This is, you know, a subversion of the Iron Cross, the German Iron Cross, which came after the attack in December 1914 on Hartlepool, Scarborough and Whitby, where there were a lot of civilian casualties. So it became a good propaganda or recruitment, at least a recruitment exercise to get people to join the army. And this, we saw it briefly earlier on. Gilly Carl has done a lot of work and collected a pretty good collection of material related to sort of secret signs and symbols that were used to against German occupation. So they would, you know, the V was particularly an important part. So, you know, the bust of George V or George VI was cut out of a coin with a V shape around it, and you put it under your lapel and you could flash it. And that was a coin, sorry, an image that you'd see as graffiti sometimes in the Channel Islands. She's done a load of work, and it's sort of the ownership of objects of the Channel Islands by the Germans is the other side of this. So there's this back and forth within this, and coins actually are really central to a lot of it. Oh, just not skip through that, just for the kind of British context here. Two coins are similar in date, one with this, which I assume has been especially made punch with the swastika stuck onto Britannia's shield. There are two of these actually in the collection, so it's, you know, at least we have a sample of two, and then a more crudely made hammer and sickle with a V underneath. So whether these were done before the Second World War or after, we don't quite know yet. Right, there's a mass of stuff from Northern Ireland. There are these three huge episodes of coin defacement. There's Napoleon III stuff relating to Sedan. There's a load of Spanish Civil War material from both sides, or well, several sides of that conflict. And then there's the Northern Irish material. As a kind of backstory, there are, you know, people, I think, tend to think of it, oh, there are these troubles related coins. but actually there's a whole load of stuff that goes right back. There's the Daniel O'Connell, you know, and Tim Millett has an amazing Roger O'Connor coin where he's kind of fashioned into a king on a coin. And there's this one that comes from the earlier part of the 20th century. So this is really just to kind of say it's not all troubles. There is this coin defacement in Ireland happening for a long time. Here's a selection. If I'm going to sort of summarize the material at the moment, there's about a 7-to-1 ratio of loyalist versus nationalist. They typically include acronyms of the paramilitary groups, and the UVF is the biggest of those. There's UFF, you know, there's the sort of tag team UFF on the one in the bottom left there. But UUC, the Vanguard, there are with the UDR, the British military units, and then there's the IRA provisionals here. But most just say IRA, they're in quite crude, not even using punches a lot of the time. And then they're the ones that are a bit more specific. Now, Lenny, you know, what does that mean? This one actually refers to Lenny Murphy, who was the head of the Shackhill Butchers. He was a member of the UVF, and according to reports, the UVF colluded with the IRA to have him assassinated. He was that toxic. And Smash H Block, this coin refers to the hunger strike period. So there's a ton of this. I can't go into it all now, but this will be a feature of the exhibition that we'll look at in a bit more detail. And as I've been going through this, you know, I've been looking at other collections and trying to get a sense of what this stuff means and what we might do with it in the future. And with that in mind, I'll move on to the next slide. Now, one of the collaborators in the project is Laura McAtackney, who is an archaeologist, contemporary archaeologist at Aarhus University. She comes from Northern Ireland. She worked a lot on the Long Kesh Mace prison. And she said to me that send Paddy home doesn't necessarily make sense to her as a nationalist attack, or sorry, as a loyalist attack on nationalists. And then I started looking at the punches. And you can see the A. I've blown up a little bit in the top there, right? The A isn't quite full. And then I noticed in some of the other coins, the A isn't quite full. And then on this coin, there was this big I and this big I. And then there's this N that has this flared bottom here. Oh, and so does this one. And there's almost, you know, whoever made these coins did them all, you know, at least with the same letter punches. So what does that mean? Is it a kind of workshop for this stuff, or is it something that actually these are made to be sold on eBay or something like that? So what I've started to do is to look at some material in other collections. And Gavin was brilliant at saying when and where he bought stuff. And for these three, there isn't any provenance. And I talked to Gary Oddy about this recently, and he sent me his stuff, and there are a couple in his collection that share some of these, and they're post 2006. And there's a huge collection in the States. It says the battery is running low on this PC. Is it plugged in? Right, I'll go even quicker. Okay, there are a couple in there at least. And then I compared that against the Linden Hall Library stuff. Now, this was material that was collected contemporaneously during the Troubles. There are none of those things here. So there's a good chance that these are concoctions, using up old, obsolete coinage for sale to collectors. I think the key bit of evidence to confirm that is if we found one that was actually not struck onto Irish coins, but onto a United Kingdom one. Okay, so contemporary money art. Now, this has been a kind of fascination of this exhibition. For me, it's discovering this new world, that there are these people who are artists in all sorts of facets, often, graffiti artists or street artists, people who work with, stencil work, inspired to some degree, some of them by Banksy, to work on money. But I thought I'd look a little bit about this kind of prehistory of that concept. And what has been kind of talked about before are the early people, the early artists were these trompe l'oeil artists, particularly Americans, who looked who are doing these amazing still lifes, which often included money. It's sort of everyday stuff. They were, stamps, that's appropriate for the room we're in today. And this piece, cards, tokens, tickets, those sorts of things. And these were so good that during their time they were not exactly challenged, but the idea that they were forging money was considered, and they were asked kind of to desist in painting such works. Then we move on to the next one there, Genpei Akasagawa in his great 0 yen banknote. He again this is a 90, I forgot to put the date on this, is the 50s, 60s piece. And this was his rebellion against being accused of money forgery for painting money. One of the big characters that many of you will have heard of is JSG Boggs. And he was interesting in that his works did two things. They were art objects in one sense, but they were also kind of performative. So what he would do, he'd hand draw, a $10 bill, and he'd use that in a transaction. The change and receipt that he got for that transaction, he would then sell as the artwork, and then it was then on the dealer or the gallery owner to go and find the original, bring those things together, and then you've got your sort of tableau of this Boggs transaction. He did get in trouble. He was arrested in the UK, which is here. That's him getting busted at the Young Unknowns Gallery in London in 1986. But he was never convicted. He was arrested twice in Australia for similar supposed crimes, but acquitted there as well. Because a lot of all his work were single-sided. They weren't trying to be money that he used as a counterfeit. And what's been great with the exhibition, I always loved this thing in the back here, this picture, this giant note that he hand drew. Finally found where it is. It's the estate of Boggs, which is they're based in Tampa, in Florida, and this is it. And this is going to be one of the star pieces if we can get it to the museum for the exhibition, which will introduce this whole section on Boggs and then the subsequent money art. He didn't really go for political stuff, other than he did a women's series, one of which included Harriet Tubman, which I'd like to be able to get as well to complement some of the other Tubman stuff that will appear in the show. Okay, we saw Banksy briefly earlier, Die-faced tenor. It's only got three elements that are different actually from a £10 note. So the bust of Diana instead of the Queen, Banksy of England there, and on the reverse it says "Trust no one" under the image of Darwin. And there were only about 50 of these sheets produced, and we found somebody that has one and is willing to lend. So this is kind of an important part of what we're doing to try and draw in different audiences to look at some of our numismatic collection. So this is a piece by Justine Smith, one of her weapons series. She produced a series of grenades using different nations' banknotes. They're entirely hollow. They're really light, but they were obviously molded around an original object. But there are machine guns and handguns, and this is the last sort of surviving piece that was available to buy. And we're thankful that we were able to secure it for the Fitz. So that will appear in the section that looks at money as a kind of raw material, because there are people who use it for this sort of thing, as well as those C.K. Wilde and Mark Wagner, particularly, who work in using cut-up banknotes in collage work. So one of the points, I think, of these Art Fund Awards is that you've got this 2-year period, so you can sort of collect topical material. And this one is one that you might not have seen before, because it had a really short life. I saw it thanks to a colleague, bought the note you see on the left there. The next day it was gone, not available anymore. And it's not because there was some issue around copyright or forgery. It was something a little bit different, which I'll speak about briefly in a second. But the note itself, it's called the Churchill Fiver Reboot. Ignore the billboard, that's the billboard, that's the note. And it depicts, instead of Churchill, you've got Patrick Hutchinson carrying anti-BLM protester away from danger, and it became a big visual image for a lot of different reasons. So this is just, this was produced to raise money for the Stephen Lawrence Foundation. And as part of the project, they made this big billboard, it's near Peckham Station. I don't think it was up for that long, because once, this was fairly well received, and people were happy to buy it and support and see where the money was going. But once the billboard was up, it became a sort of viral social media phenomenon where there are a lot of, strong arguments on all sides about the appropriateness of depicting a person of color in this way. So they're non-violent, non-aggressive, and they're carrying someone away from danger. So the project was pretty quickly wrapped up after that, and all the proceeds that were secured went to the foundation. But I thought it was interesting just to sort of see how sort of messages can get hijacked. And what we really wanted to do was actually reproduce that billboard in the exhibition itself. But I think that's been squashed by people kind of above me in the hierarchy. Last couple now. Sorry, this is going on. This doesn't do justice to it. It's quite leery. It's really nice. This is a Dave Bonaguidi, his trash banknote. Making a kind of statement on dollars. The dollar is the kind of go-to background for a lot of these money artists, because I guess it's, in one sense, it's easy, it's cheaper than the equivalent in UK money for those working here at least. That's another very garish one. And again, at the time we bought this, it was brilliant, but it's almost like this is kind of old news now. So we had, it's about, at the time when there was the controversy around the war between America and Mexico, and I guess, Trump isn't relevant now, but yeah, he is, right? Okay, as we're talking today. So I wonder what's coming next from some of these producers. One of the things I've found actually quite moving and important in this project is to kind of capture a material sense through monetary objects of the idea of refugees and displaced people. This piece was commissioned from the artists. The original appeared in an exhibition called Cash is King 2 at the Saatchi Gallery, which was curated and put together by Carrie Reichardt and Bob Osborne, who I'm thankful to as kind of conciliary for helping me out with a lot of the money art interactions. But the original of this was sold very, very quickly. But I got in touch and asked them if they would be prepared to do a new version of it, essentially, which they were happy to do, because the funds, the proceeds are entirely going to the Choose Love charity. So this is, the concept behind it is, it's a Syrian banknote. It's been folded into this quite fragile object. It's supposed to refer to the fragility or of the boats that people are using to try to escape out of the Middle East into Greece in particular. But what we can see in money is there's a piece called Hit Hard by Issam Korbaj, who comes from Syria himself, which is, it's like why people left Syria is embodied in that piece. How people are trying to escape in the boat, their reception or stays in camps. This is from a refugee camp in Corfu that was collected by Gabe Michenska, who volunteered there and got a selection of these objects for the museum. And also the sort of end game of this story are the Aspen cards, which are credit cards, prepaid credit cards that asylum seekers are given when they're here, waiting to find out if they are allowed to stay or not. So we have the elements of that story collected together. Right, final one. This is Big Bang 2. This is one of the really exciting and poignant stories and projects that I heard about right at the start of what I was doing. Actually, I think when I went to see the Simmons, I went to see Hillary just after that. So the background to the story is that Big Bang 2 was a project conceived by Hilary Powell and Dan Edelstein, and they set up a kind of faux bank in Walthamstow called the Hoe Street Central Bank. And in the bank, they produced kind of money-like artworks. That's some of the production. These are the 4 types. The figures you see on there are, you know, local good causes like the food bank and the youth group, the primary school, and so on. And they sold these to raise money, and the money was enough that they could give some back to the causes, but also that they could buy out £1 million worth of payday debt in their local community. Because, you know, this isn't, there are no different ways at £1 million. It was, you can trade on debt for pennies in the pound. So they were able to do that. And then the symbolic explosion or detonation of that debt occurred when they blew up this golden transit van filled with imitation notes. And that currently is in a lockup near in Cambridge. It's going to be part of the exhibition. There are at least 200 bits that we've had to record and measure all of those. It's been an interesting process, but they also produced, you know, these very crude looking coins out of some of the melted down parts of the van. So you bought a bond to entitle you to that part. So it's a bit, you know, there will be elements in the show of those that are trying to affect. It's not just, oh, here's my, you know, satirical statement using a piece of money. These people and lots of the others are actually active in eradicating some of the issues that they feel are really important. So I think I've been going for an hour and I'm very sorry. There's a load of thank yous to people who have helped so far. There's more beyond that, certainly within my institution. I'd say that Currencies of Conflict is in those brackets because that probably isn't what it's going to be called. That was what the project's called. The exhibition will have a naming committee that will decide on what that is going to be. And I think the catalogue will also follow that. But yeah, it'll be in 3 big galleries upstairs at the Fitz. And it's going to happen in October to January. And if all goes well, a small version will pop up in Toronto in the fall of 2023. So there's a lot of research ongoing with this. I think you've hopefully seen from some of the early material, the countermarked coins of the 18th, 19th century, the issues that people were agitated about are also relevant in some of the more contemporary stuff. And there's some new stuff, research areas that have come up through this, particularly I mentioned the trench art, which I would be interested in pursuing beyond this, if able. But thank you very much for listening, and I hope that I'll be able to see some of you in and before actually all the applause rings out. What I was going to suggest is perhaps we could have a special BNS viewing for those that are able to come to Cambridge early on in the process. But thank you very much.